right, I'll call the meeting to order. It's 12:03. This is the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee. We are being, I guess, audio and visual recorded. So I noticed at our last meeting and watching online that we don't need to get real close to the mics. We're getting a little bit of resonance when we're too close to them. So we'll learn on that. So hopefully this will work, just having them in front of us. Please silence any electronic devices and cell phones since we are being recorded. Chris, do you need a roll call or do you have everybody down? All right, so first item on the agenda is the minutes of 12/3. I have a couple of minor corrections. The header, Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, not Commission, and no A in the front. Where that came from. And then at
I have one correction.
Just a moment, Gary. At the end, under establishment of meeting schedule, it's written as bi-monthly. That would be every other month. We're actually semi-monthly, which is twice a month. So we want to get that corrected. Gary, go ahead.
Just where you referenced Carol Bella.
Yes.
She's not the chairman, she's the co-president of the Grand Point Association.
Oh, thank you. And is her name spelled correctly?
C-A-R-O-L-E.
Only one R.
One R.
Okay.
And sorry, Gary, you said co-chair.
Co-president.
Co-president.
Co-president. President of the
Is
Grand
it
Point Association.
is it the homeowners association, Gary, or is it just Brant Point Association?
It's the Grand Point Association.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
PA.
you.
Yeah, I can only apologize. I don't know why it's not on the big screen. But thank you. By the way, I've made those adjustments.
Okay, anyone else have comments or changes to the minutes from the last meeting?
No.
Motion to approve?
So move.
I'll move it.
Second.
First or second? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? None, carries unanimously. With Fritz, Sarah, Peter, Ian, and Mary voting, and Gary on the phone voting as well. Okay, we have several discussions planned for today. Probably the most significant one is our projected meeting dates and times for 2020. We had a scheduling conflict and we proposed, hopefully everybody got that email, had a chance to check their calendars, to move our meeting time to 10:45 to 12:45 to accommodate another meeting that wants to happen in the same room, keeping it on the first and third Tuesday of the month. So Vince had some replies. Is there anybody who didn't reply to Vince who has a problem with that change?
Can you say again what the times are? It's not a problem. I just want.
10:45 to 12:45.
Thank you.
On the first and third Tuesday of the month. Essentially, there's a 1 o'clock meeting on one of those Tuesdays that we would be in conflict with. No comments or objections to that. We'll assume that is going to work. Did Jen and Graham both say?
Jen and Graham both said it didn't there's no problem, I think.
Okay, so Matt's the only one that got it.
Matt, if everyone here agrees to it, Matt's the only one.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, beg your pardon, I think Matt actually did comment. He didn't say it was possible, yes.
Oh, good. Okay, so that should work for everybody. So our next meeting then would be January 7th, downstairs in the community room at 10:45 a.m. And we'll go from there. Awesome. So Vince has a few presentations that we're going to go through. The staff lease system, which I don't know if it was introduced in the hazard mitigation plan, but it is present in the hazard mitigation plan. And then we'll talk about other plans that either exist or are in development that may have an impact on the RFP for the Coastal Resilience Plan. And let's do those and then we'll move on.
Oh, nice.
So take it away, Vince.
if everyone's comfortable, I'm just going to talk about project evaluation methods, and I'm just going to use something that the town has experience with, which is the Stapley system. But I am going to provide a health warning, first of all, that this might not necessarily be the system that a consultant might choose once we actually engage a company for the CRP. So this is just kind of an example of something that we've already seen, or that the town has already seen, so to speak, from the hazard mitigation plan, and just run through the basics of how it works.
And I asked Vance to do this because we had talked about how to prioritize different areas or different situations, and I thought this might be a great introduction to that exercise.
Thank you, Mary. So, effectively, it's just a method to evaluate and rank potential mitigation projects. First, we need the projects, and then we need to rank them. That's basically what we're talking about. This is a method that was developed by FEMA. So it comes out towards the end of the mitigation of the CRP, or as the town has already seen, at the end of the hazard mitigation plan. Then the plan will outline a lot of potential methods and locations where things might be implemented, and then this is just a way to rank them. Basically, I just covered that. So there are 7 categories: social, technical, administrative, political, legal, economic, and environmental. So the 7 categories use a group of 23 considerations under each of these headings. There's no point in listing them all out, and I can make this presentation available to everybody afterwards. So the basics of what we need to know and understand are that each consideration, each of the smaller pieces under each major heading, has an accompanying question that asks about the potential positive, negative outcomes of the project and any potential mitigations, and this helps to decide the category score. Quite simply, the category score it can be as simple as a positive, a minus, a negative, and or just a 0 for neutral. So just kind of by way of example, this is kind of the example that FEMA supplies, and you can just under each of the headings go through each of the considerations and fill it out as needed. So there's a kind of a simplified version that I was given to see how it works. So this uses the simple plus and minus system, and the zeros for things that aren't considered considered neutral. And the way that the ranking system works is you can end up with a score of 0 to 7, and 0 to 3 is low, 4 is medium, 5 to 7 is high. So then you can pick out your high priority projects based on that. So in practice, this is what Nantucket has seen in the past. So this is directly from the hazard mitigation plan that the town has. I know it's quite small, I can provide it later.
I can't see it, I'm close.
But basically all we need to look at is this one column at the very far right that has scores in it. This is granted small and hard to see, but it is kind of a weighted Stapley criteria system where both benefits of the project and the costs and negative parts of the project are also taken into account, so that you can end up with a realistic Stapley score for how these projects might be ranked, so that you can decide on which ones will be needed for the fastest implementation. So the best thing I can do is ask, is there any questions about how ranking should work?
So it seems like your only choices are 0, 1, and -1. You can't decide that a category has a wider range.
So within this, the consultants that worked on this particular one for the town, for the hazard mitigation plan, they just went with 1s and 0s under benefit and cost. So effectively what they did was they broke it into 2 parts. This is a benefits column, this is a costs column. These are all positives, and any negatives, that being the only one ranked there. So the Stapley score for this project, which was to do with the Steamship Authority, ended up scoring 5, but there was one high cost consideration, so it lost 1 point and ended up being ranked as a 4, as a medium.
But as on Mary's point, there's no reason why we couldn't use a scale of 1 to 5 for an internal discussion.
For internal discussion, yes. but the reality of it is, again, the health warning, that it'll be whatever the hired consultants will decide to use. They might use a Stepley system, they might use an adapted Stepley system, or use something else completely. But I wanted to just provide insight into how these systems are in place so that we can rank projects.
Yeah, we have to understand, so it's good to understand how, I agree with you, to understand how it's done.
Yeah.
But
So-
I worry that if something's hard to do and expensive, but we really need it, then it may not, it may be a 4 instead of a 6, and what do we do? I mean, that, there's certain, so yeah, so if we, you know, if sometimes you have to weight certain aspects more than other aspects, I would think.
Yeah, so say under social, for the sake of argument, there's a set of questions that work with social. They will be, will the project affect one segment of the population unfairly? Then you answer that question, then you can provide positives and negatives to offset to effects or other obstacles, and then you can provide mitigation that might help change that score. Then that gives you what would be hopefully a quite fair ranked score at the end of it, under just social for the sake of argument. But you know, you also have to take into account the potential political and legal implications of developments as well.
So you're saying that you would change the description of the task to get the ranking you want, is kind of what it feels like.
Well, yes, but essentially, okay, we could try and do it internally, but the reality of the situation is this will be done by a consultant.
How will the consultant know what the community will accept or not, or,
Yeah.
you know, like what, how will they know those types of things?
So, well, first of all, I've been writing the RFP and built into it that we're going to have some public charlets, some meetings, so to get public opinion. It will be relatively similar to how the MVP system worked, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, and the report that came from that. We could, that's how the whatever consultant will end up gauging some of the rankings for these things, potentially asking these kinds of questions and looking at these kinds of criteria.
So then it's an event like the MVP where specific people are invited to an all-day type of thing where we tell the consultant, where they tell the consultant, this is what we want, this is what's important, something like that.
That would be driven by our stakeholder list. Yeah, effectively, yeah. So,
Because it wouldn't work, or it wouldn't be fair for just this group to say, this is what's important.
yes.
Who does the ranking? Who actually puts the scores in? What does our committee do? Do we individually get to rank them, or do we as a group decide it should be a 0 or 1, or do we do neither, or does the consultant do the scoring?
As a committee, I would imagine that once, say, the consultants generate this, and the committee will get to look at it first and say, well, potentially this is ranked too low, or this is ranked too high, and then the consultants could use that information for their report.
So one of the key points is that the process includes steps where the consultants come back to the town and say, how are we doing, and ask for more input. Is that correct?
I think it would be interesting for us to do it concurrently or before, and then see how it comes out compared to what they do. You know, rather than sort of second guess after, you know, I would be interested to do it a month before, stick it in a drawer, and then see what happens, you know?
Because we have different skill sets. I mean, the consultants come in with more knowledge about environmental and economic and legal, and we have the local knowledge of political and administrative and social. So I think it's it's good to have both sides of it. And I think if there was a wide discrepancy, that would be an excellent point for discussion.
I just wanted to point out, as the HMP coordinator, one of the things to be mindful is this process, this Stapley, has been around for decades. So it's not something new that FEMA all of a sudden decided to say, hey, this is how we want to have them be done. I think what's the biggest thing for you all to take out of this is something that a consultant can use, but there's other methods. So it doesn't have to be this, but this is what's been done for our HMP. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And Holly, the HMP was funded by FEMA or directed
we
at
got,
FEMA?
we got a FEMA grant.
Okay, so that
Yes.
made sense to use that.
Well-
The coastal resilience is not tied to a particular state or federal agency, is that?
Correct.
It came from the MVP, wasn't it?
Is it, well, is it?
The coastal resiliency plan, which is what everybody as a community that was involved in that 8-hour workshop, long day workshop, that was one of the actions that came out of it to create a coastal resiliency plan. So you could say that the methods that the Commonwealth has put in place for communities to say, hey, we want to be resilient, has helped formulate the idea of having a coastal resiliency plan. But I think it's also important that, like I think I explained before, where the FEMA document and the MVP document, those are prescriptive documents. Granted, they're living documents, they're always going to be added on to what have you, whereas this coastal resiliency plan is ours. We can decide what levels are in there. And that's again why we need to be mindful of the professionals that we're going to get, because that's what they do. This isn't just a, something new. It is a newer aspect, but it's just important to think about the fact that it is unique in that regard.
So would we have potentially a bigger toolkit to draw on for the coastal resiliency plan than for the other plans that were for a purpose defined by another agency?
Yes, this is going to be specific to what Nantucket wants, whereas the other ones are required by the federal government and the state government.
Thank you, Holly.
That's why I started with the health warning of there are other systems, and
Yes.
whatever the consultant chooses to use, that's what it will be.
It's great to understand.
But this is kind of something just that we have some experience with because of the hazard mitigation plan. So that's why it had come up in conversation at these meetings before. That's why I prepared this. So if anyone wants more detailed information, I'm happy to send that on.
Does anybody want to take a closer look at that screenshot that Vince had up from the hazard mitigation plan? Because we can pop the plan up. I've got it on my laptop. I can pass it over to Vince if he doesn't have it on his.
It's okay, I got it.
There's a lot more on there than just the weighting. There's the funding categories, there's the funding timeline, there's the responsible department status. So if anybody wants to dig into that a little bit more, you just say so, and we can take a few minutes and do that.
By the way, I'm only showing the first 6 or 7 or so projects. Holly might be able to give an exact number, but I think there was 70 or so.
55. We actually took a couple of them that were very similar and merged them together, but it came out to be 55. And as of June of this year, we had 23 underway and 2 completely finished. I know since then it's changed, and I apologize, I don't have that exact figure at the moment, but we've been ongoing working on that.
Is there a projected sort of completion date for the projects that were listed in the hazard mitigation plan?
FEMA requires for local jurisdictions that do a FEMA hazard mitigation plan that the projects or actions that are outlined in the plan are completed within a 5-year time frame. It used to be, you gotta remember, this is only almost 20 years federal law. This came out of the Federal Disaster Act of the year 2000. And so a lot of the states required their jurisdictions to create a hazard plan around 2005, 2006, 2007. Nantucket did their first one in 2007. They're required to update it every 5 years. We finally obviously just got ours updated this year. We will be updating it again in another 5 years in 2024, I think is what it is, 23, 24. So basically, out of the actions that we've indicated in this plan, we have to let FEMA know when it comes to the update where they stand, whether we completed it, and if we haven't, reasons why. What was the reason why we didn't, or maybe we're still working on it, and that's fine if they overlap. If we say, you know, this is something we started, we're still working on, they're fine with that, but they're going to want to have some type of justification.
Do you know where we stand on the original hazard plan for that list?
There was quite a few. There was quite a few that were completed that I think were done without the people being in the limelight, if you will, behind the scenes. And that was something that was fleshed out. It's always fleshed out through the review process with the consultant, of where you were with your original action. There were a lot more that were included. Give you an example of one that carried over from 2007 to this one, and which is something that we've received CZM funding for, is the project for Sacagawea Pond, that washover, that breakover that Jeff has talked about before. That is something that Nantucket outlined in our first plan as an issue. I've known it as a kid as an issue. Obviously this past, 2018 was it, where the washover really happened again, and I think that put that project as we really need to make this as a priority. So yes, there are projects that do carry over.
So, I have a question. Is it a statutory obligation, or is it tied in with a financial incentive?
So it's kind of both.
Okay.
The federal government wants you to have a hazard plan,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, if you don't have a plan, you're not getting funding if there's a disaster. The only recourse really, what was our recourse, is we got state funding versus having any federal funding. And thank God we didn't have a natural disaster really that affected us that we could have received federal funding for. So it's imperative for jurisdictions to have a hazard plan, because God forbid something does happen, that the federal government does raise that level to say, hey, this was a natural disaster. You know, if we don't have a plan, then we're not gonna get any of that funding. So that's why it's important, as well as there's certain criteria that have changed since the federal law was established in the year 2000 to include, and the reason why I got into it is to include our historical and cultural resources. Year 2005, FEMA came out with a document about this thick of saying, you know what, you should do that. And Nantucket didn't at that time, and now we do. Granted, it's a sliver. It's in there, which is good, because now, you know, God forbid, look at what are we, a National Historic Landmark? We need to make sure that that's part of the conversation from FEMA's perspective.
Thank you.
Holly, if you have any further comment, why don't you come up and join us, because we didn't get you on the mic. Sorry, I didn't think of that.
Oh, yeah,
fast
you
enough.
all are on the record,
Yeah.
aren't you? I apologize.
Okay, anybody else questions on the Staffley system or on other potential prioritization systems? Peter?
And will all of that be in our library?
This is from the hazard mitigation plan, and Vince's presentation will be in the library. Yes.
Okay.
Why don't we move on to the rest of the plans?
Yep. So, I was asked to, we were chatting about this and we were trying to figure out, well, what exactly will be going into our coastal resilience plan. We're trying to figure out what background information, what documents exist and can be used in the coastal resilience plan. So I started just putting together a list, and then as I was putting it together, it ended up being a two-part list, because there's some documents that do exist and that we can use straight away. There's a couple of other documents that are in preparation and will come to the town so that can be used within the coastal resilience plan as the consultants are working, by the sound of things. Others are just items to be aware of. So we'll just run through some of the existing plans and reports that we can can be used straight away. So there's the hazard mitigation plan first, which is how, as Holly was talking about, was required by FEMA. This has been in place in the town since was it March this year? I think it was accepted by the select board. And second.
March 8th.
Secondary to that, we have the municipal vulnerability preparedness status for the town, which enables us to get, it's a state program to enable us to the town to get MVP action grants. That also came with the MVP report that was accepted by the town in April of this year. So both of those documents are quite new and very, very relevant, and will feed directly into the coastal resilience plan.
Can I ask you a question before you go ahead? The hazard mitigation plan, because that comes with potential FEMA funding, if an action is identified in the coastal resilience plan and it overlaps with something that's already been identified in the hazard mitigation plan, do we need to note that? How does that interaction take place?
Because it's already effectively identified and within the hazard mitigation plan, this is something that the consultants can then draw on and then say, all right, this is identified, we can mention that it's identified and it's in the HMP and will effectively be dealt with, so that they can say, continue with that plan. Then they can identify other things at the time that are missing, and then they can go through the step scoring system to say how needed that might be.
Would they rescore any HMP tasks because of the coastal resilience plan? Would that change priorities?
That would be with the consultants to decide, but I imagine that they might not even consider it because it's already
It's
dealt
already
with.
done, yeah.
So, in 2009, this is the Nantucket master plan. This was done in 2009, and there's been some suggestion that it might be redrafted next year. But as it stands, the consultants can still use the 2009 master plan.
And Matt, is that the one that Andrew Vorse is working on? Fritz, you're probably the better one to know. Okay, thank you.
I think it was 2014, Dave Franzuto did the coastal management plan, which establishes how we should manage our coastal infrastructure and public access and roads near beaches and near coastal environments. There's also the Harbours Plan, the Nantucket and Nantucket Harbours Action Plan. I was chatting with Jeff about that, and he is hoping that that might get updated in 2020 or 2021, if all goes well. Aside from that, there's the storm surge and inundation pathways that CZM and Mark Borelli brought together. Those will be invaluable for the Coastal Resilience Plan. And then there's other online databases, things like NOAA have a lot of information on tides and storm tides and sea level rise. Morris, which is something that Jeff spoke about on December 3rd, about the online data systems that are available there. And then just within our town as well, within the town GIS system, there's several mapping tools there that will feed directly into the Coastal Resilience Plan. So they're the ones that already exist and that we have and we know about. Then if we shift on, we look at the developing plans, things that are on the way. This is kind of a more extensive list as it turns out. So
it's before you get to the next plan, just a question. On the first two items, the hazard mitigation plan and the municipal vulnerability preparedness community status, those are the two that I see that have some funding attached to them. So apparently there's some FEMA funding, and we also are eligible for MVP action grants. In both of those instances, there's funding available, and in both of those instances, they deal with the same coastal resilience issues that we are dealing with. So my question is, do we get to use that funding, or does somebody else get to use that funding, since it's the same coastal resiliency issue?
that's a good question, and I like to think of it in some ways that we're the lucky third child. The Coastal Resilience Plan is coming after these two. Effectively, the funding is in place or is already in the planning process. So we get to refer to those as tasks that are complete. The Coastal Resilience Plan will mention both and the tasks that are in both if needed, but we'll also separately identify where there are gaps potentially in coastal infrastructure to stop storm tides or to reduce the effect of storm tides. But more importantly, neither document takes sea level rise into account, which is one of the key points of the Coastal Resilience Plan.
But also we should indicate when we're doing that structuring that there is some funding in theory available to be used to deal with those issues.
Correct. And
whether it's from FEMA or the state of Massachusetts.
or we can just mention that it's already in place, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
We can also mention that we've already established fees or grants from both those programs.
So yeah, Holly is just saying that, just to mention that those already, that we've already established where the grants are coming from for a lot of the HMP and MVP or action items.
May I ask a question? Excuse
Sorry,
me.
Maureen Coleman.
Yeah, Maureen Phillips. Oh, I'm sorry, what? Do I need to identify myself?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, okay, good. All right, Concom and Nantucket resident. When this finally gets delivered from Malone and McBroom, is this going to be up on the town, the draft will be up on the town website for everybody to see?
Sorry, do you mean this next strategy stuff?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, we're jumping ahead now. So yes, so this, I've been expecting this any day now for far too long, is my first simple comment.
Yes.
I've been hoping to have had this quite some time ago. Chuck Larson is the contact person with Malone and McBroom for this Coastal Resilience Strategies document. And he contacts them regularly at my suggestion because I want this committee to review it.
Is there anything else that might be done to get these people whom we're paying a lot of money to do their job? I don't mean to be obnoxious.
No, yeah.
Well, I do mean to be obnoxious about this because I found their work in a prior plan to not be wonderful or terribly responsive. So I'm very concerned about this. So Holly, I know this is your favorite thing in the world. So what can we do? Because this was talked about to be here in April, and here we are almost a year later. And so what can we do? Because I think this is very frustrating for you all, and of course for everybody else.
Well, we contact them regularly. Chuck is the main contact point. He's not here to answer to this question. I talk to Chuck twice, 3 times a week, trying to find out if he's heard any more. As soon as I have it, I'm bringing it. It's going to be out to this committee as soon as it possibly can. In terms of being on the town website, I think it'd have to go through the select board first to be accepted.
Because it's going to be more of a strategies document to help you all create this plan committee. It's not, they have basically given us within this draft, not, it's a tool, not saying, hey, this is what you should be doing, these are ideas. So it's going to give the committee that tool to look at what is potential for the plan itself. I think what's important to realize is, yes, they were our consultant for our hazard plan. They were also our consultant for the MVP, and then they were also the consultant for this. So, and a lot of, as you can see at the time frames, they were all done at the same time, very overlapping, which, you know, it has its pros and has its cons, as we all are aware. So I think it's just important that, yes, this is a document that is going to be available to the general public once the select board is okay with that. But first and foremost, it's going to be very important for this committee to do what they've been charged to do. We definitely want to make sure that, you know, it is used. It's not that money that we used, or I guess the town used, because that was the only thing that did not come from a grant, whereas the HMP was a grant. On the grants, just so Gary's aware, we have received both federal grants for the HMP update. They have other grants that we can apply for other projects if we see fit. With the MVP, we also received an action grant, which I have mentioned to this committee before. We're going through the RFP process right now, and that's to achieve our historic guidelines for the building the Nantucket mine for the HDC. So we have been, any chance possible. I don't even think the document for the report was wet. I mean, it was dry. It was wet, and we applied. It was that quick. So just so everybody's aware that we are taking every action to do that, to apply for anything that we possibly can, because at the end of the day, it's something that we've already, as a community, paid towards. And if we don't have to take it out of our direct pocket, we can take it somewhere else. That's great. So. Thank you.
The next one, this is one that was close to my heart. The Nantucket Beach Management Plan was originally written by Jeff Carlson and other people in 2004. In my previous job at the time as the Protected Species Technician, I was given the task of updating it. This is no longer on my desk, I'm very thankful to say, but last winter I rewrote a draft of the Nantucket Beach Management Plan It's now with legal, as I understand it, before it can be looked at being accepted, hopefully at some stage next year. This is not on my desk anymore, but hopefully it will be something that will be a resource for the Coastal Resilience Plan.
But if we have gotten, Holly said we've actually gotten the funding for some of these things already, what's happening to the funds? Are they being
So are we going backwards again?
applied so that we can use them someday, or what?
No, and I apologize for confusion. We received grants from federal government for our
Right.
updating our FEMA plan, okay? So that was that was a reimbursable grant. We got reimbursed, I can tell you that. That was one set of grants that we applied for and got. But we also received the MVP action grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to achieve one of the actions that was outlined in our MVP report. They're ever evolving of grant opportunities, so we're trying to do that as best as we possibly humanly can. We're not just sitting by the wayside and dismissing that opportunity.
That's good.
And Capital met yesterday, Capital Committee has some money aside. I'm not sure which pocket it's coming from, but I think they had $3 or $4 million for a new pump down at Children's. They had a few other items on, in the next year or two already. And I'm not sure, they're probably applying for grants and hoping to fund it through those issues. So some of it is moving forward.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay. So the other developing documents that will be available to us, the RFP is out, I think, again for the Resilient Nantucket Designs for Adaptation. I think we're planning to have something in place in that within the next year or 18 months, that rough time frame potentially.
This is the MVP action grant that I mentioned, Resilient Nantucket Design for Adaptation, and we got that funding. We are required to have something done by June 2020.
Okay, June, very good. And this is mainly focused on the historic areas. So then there's Nantucket's sustainability program. This is something that's currently in development as well.
May I interrupt, please?
Yes.
Just as a question to Holly, does that have the University of Florida?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
All that
Yep.
information that Finn had done recently, yes, that will be included. It's definitely not going to be put to the side.
Right, great. Thank you, Vince.
No worries. Thanks, Ian. So this Nantucket Sustainability Program is being developed by Kim Lundgren Associates, and they are developing methods and branding, actions and branding for how the town is going to move forward with all of its sustainability programs potentially. There is also one more report that we don't. It's on the way, is all we know. It's a FEMA-sponsored erosion study, and this is something I'm quite looking forward to. Hopefully, it will be something that we can even get to look at soon. There are no dates on this yet. It is the only thing I can sadly confirm on that one.
Do we have any date for the sustainability program to be delivered?
I don't remember.
I know we literally just had a meeting about it with Cabinet last week, so it's still evolving, but it's closer to the end.
Okay.
Of presenting something.
Yeah, Kim has been on island with her staff several times, and we've had many meetings, and I don't know when she's supposed to, was it February or so she's supposed to wrap up, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't even know when she's supposed to deliver her report, but it is something that will be available for the Coastal Resilience Plan to look at. Then there's another report. Gary, I know you will be interested in this one. It's the stormwater and drain study that the DPW has commissioned. Fuss and O'Neill are the contracted consultants on that, and it's mainly focused on the downtown area in Brant Point, as I understand. Hopefully that one will be something that we will get a lot out of for the Coastal Resilience Plan. We also have to look down the road at other potential plans that might come in the future. So one of the things that we're quite hopeful to get right and it's something that's come up at this committee before, but it's a sediment transport study. And that's kind of a very needed study because it feeds directly into two other potential plans. It feeds into the harbour dredge plan and the beach nourishment plan for whenever they might come along. But to have either of those other plans in place, you need to have the sediment transport study done first. And then there's the other resources. One of the nicest ones, and one of the ones that I want to put more effort into encouraging here, is the Nantucket Big Beach project, which is an easement that allows you basically to walk from one property to the next and not lose access. So, do we have any questions on resources?
I do. I have a question about, we talked a lot about at our last meeting about what our committee can do to help push the plan along. And so we have a lot of plans available that we can draw from for information, for background information, for kind of what's going on now. And we talked before about, research that's also could all flow in. So is this all information that we can just give to the consultants, or is this information that we can start working from? Or I think that it's really good to see all this, and I'm really excited to see what's coming up too, like the things that we who aren't part of the town don't always know about. So that's exciting. But I'm just curious, like how that directly informs our charge, because I feel like we want to do something.
So hopefully, item D might actually help push that forward once we get to that later. But in terms of research, once the consultants are hired and start working and they start going through their discovery process and looking at what's out there, we'll have something to hand them directly. What might be useful is if we're able to give a guide to all of this, what's in place, what's coming down the road, and kind of give, for want of a better term, an abstract on each one to say what's in it, and would help feed into it. So maybe if we just did some reviewing of these documents, we could put together something like, forgive the scientist in me, but a book of abstracts for each of these to say what we have and what's in development.
And specific to the coastal resiliency viewpoint. Not trying to advertise the entire plan, but saying this is what's in that plan that we need to.
Do you think that would help, Sarah?
I think so. I'm getting a little worried that we're getting more. We are talking about more and more about all the information we have, which is great. We know we have a lot, but hoping that it either gets used or because I don't think that Malone and McBroom used a lot of the studies. Maybe they did, but. Yeah, just wanting to make sure that it goes somewhere, that we don't put a lot of work explaining this stuff and then they don't even look at it, or if if we can do something ahead of time and use it information ourselves. I don't know. I know that wasn't a popular
and the biggest thing
choice before.
Is, with my experience now with doing RFPs, that's the biggest thing is having that information in there so they can understand these are what we have available.
Yeah.
This is what we're working on. Because to be honest with you, I'm very concerned, and I think Vince is on the same page. We don't want to have duplicated efforts, but at the same time, we also don't want to have a hole, if you will, and where it's not crossed over.
Right.
That's the biggest thing to be vigilant on is at the end of the day, we have these same goals. There is the word is there's a role for each one of them. Yeah. And I guess it's imperative for us as a committee, as a town, to make sure that we're saying, okay, these are what we're working on, because we are really, there's some aspects of sustainability and resiliency that we're doing great in the state, in the Commonwealth, that is amazing when I hear it. I'm like, really? We are? Okay, that's great. That's good. That's good. That means that our efforts are there. But at the same time, I think we all have that mutual feeling of, well, we can do so much more. Yeah. So if we don't be, forthright and saying we have all this information, or these are projects that we're working on, we don't want to. Whoever we get as a consultant, I think they have a big shoes to fill,
Yes, they do.
to make us all happy as well as the public.
Right.
But I see where you're saying on that. What you know.
Yeah.
I think you all are that component to say, hey, look, the fact of the matter is we do have this plan, but it doesn't include sea level rise. It doesn't include how are we developing around the town.
It doesn't look at high tide.
It doesn't, right, there's so many aspects of it, and to be honest with you, this is like the way of even bringing preservation into it. This is the way, sustainability and being able to preserve our heritage at the end of the day. So I mean, it's all intermingled. Every time I review something or read something, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's all this crossover.
And I like the idea of the abstract, because I think what we could do with those is we could put them on our library website where we have the documents. And instead of somebody saying, oh, what's this? Oh my gosh, it's a 700-page document. They can read the abstract and say, okay, this is why this document is relevant to coastal resiliency. And then if they want more, they can dig in. And perhaps we have a couple of places to point them to.
So I hate to be kicking back. I'm not actually. What I'd like to do is ask for help, I suppose,
Yes.
is a better way.
Oh,
to
yeah.
So there's a lot of documents, I've read them all, but to write, say, a little abstract or intro, whatever you might call it, on each one of these would be very time consuming.
I don't
I'd
think
like
we
to-
can ask you to do that while we're asking you to do this very important thing, which is write the RFP for the plan.
Yeah, so
But we could volunteer to help.
yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. If I could
Yeah.
get some people to volunteer to help do this and start putting stuff together, so that maybe book of abstracts is the wrong term, but I'm going to continue to use it, but to put together an overview or a review of everything we have or are expecting to have, so that we can have something that we can hand straight to a consultant, kind of a little roadmap. By the way, I'll also happily say most of these two slides were lifted straight from the RFP, because that's where they belong. I'm already kind of detailing to the consultants what we have. Now, if we have an accompanying document that comes later, that we can say, all right, here you go, this is more background information, and then big stacks of, or maybe a memory stick full of everything that's on it, and say, now review this. Here's some of what the town considers to be the most pertinent stuff, and this committee considers to be the pieces that should really be focused on.
The other point is we would have to pay them to read all those thousands of pages of documents. It wouldn't be a bad idea to give them a summary.
That's a very good point, Mary.
But don't they come with abstracts and summaries? Most reports I've read do, especially large ones.
Well, again, this is from the
Executive
coastal resilience perspective. None of these plans were written specifically for that perspective.
So that, like, if you want to pick down through the hazard mitigation plan, which is something like just shy of 700 pages, you can give them a little directory and say, all right, you really don't need to read section 1 for the sake of argument. Skip straight to section 3 and look at the table on page whatever, and this is kind of what would be most relevant for the coastal resilience plan.
Yeah, there are things like earthquakes in the hazard mitigation plan that are not our concern. Yeah.
So should we start putting that together, start looking at how that might work?
So are you asking us, all of us, to go through all these plans?
No,
No, divide them up. Like,
No, but
We
what,
could either do an
No,
online sign up, or we could draw plan names out of a hat, or we could just ask for a volunteer plan by plan.
are you asking us to pull from this what is important to the coastal resiliency plan so that someone can then write a cheat sheet for the consultant, basically?
Yeah, you can volunteer to do it, I would say. I don't want to sign.
I'll volunteer.
I'm imagining one person per plan, not the entire committee.
I'll volunteer to write the thing if everybody gives me the information.
Oh, cool.
Cool, I'll work with you on that.
And then I'll take whatever plan you want me to go through and do my share, and then write some sort of narrative if you want.
That would work.
I'll help out, but we can do it like as a sign up or something.
Okay, perfect, I like that. So
I don't want to say now
I'll
what.
put something together for Jen and Brian who aren't here, so they can understand.
We'll sign them up for everything.
Absolutely.
Because I think some of them, like some of them might have a few important pieces of information, but not aren't as aligned. And then like the hazard mitigation plan, obviously there's more. Something like the Nantucket beach management plan as it stands now, like before the update, you can say what's published now is, quite dated, but has some good bits of information, stuff like that.
Yeah. because I imagine yourself and Jen have quite a bit from the background of this as well. You've worked on it quite extensively after reading your presentation from late November. So I'd like to get other perspectives that way as well.
Yeah, and we like one of the things we talked about was when we gave our presentation was like the storm tide pathways and Mark Borelli's work, and then even some of the other research that's gone on the island. It's not part of like the plans, but if we have other resources part.
Yeah, I did have a heading, but documents are always coming up, so I had been trying to find more, but one big beach was the only thing that I could find to fit under that at the moment. But absolutely, I'm happy to gather and garner more information and get it all into one kind of cheat sheet for the consultants.
I think what you all have already done too, with collaborating all the information for the online library, I think that's also going to be beneficial for the consultant too. I think you've done a good job with that.
Yeah.
We might then need to sort of abstract the library titles saying, you know, don't look at X, Y, and Z because they're not really designed for, I don't know, just in my head, but there were a lot of like articles there that we wouldn't necessarily want them to read, you know, a New York Times article. Yeah, that's up to them.
And they may already have.
Yeah, yeah. But we need a certain section of it or something.
I don't think we need to do that for every aspect of the library. I think if we're going to give them something specific and say, here are the plans that are important, that's going to be the stuff. Yeah, and maybe to make this easier for you, Vince, and for all of us, maybe if we don't do every single one, you know, definitely highlight the ones that you really want, you know, so that we can work on those first, because I don't want that to delay the RFP. Like, I wouldn't want to be delaying anything either.
Everything on this page here that we already have would be stuff that could get divided out amongst people here in some way or form. And some of the stuff that are developing or are on the way, that might be a separate document that could be done for. Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, that can serve more as a list, because if it's developing, you know, it's not going to have information in it yet. So
that's exactly right.
Right. That sounds good.
Like this developing stuff, there's things like this I don't even know when to expect.
I just think it's important to outline that these are things that are ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and leave it at that. And if they feel that it's important to dig into it, then they can do that. And we also hopefully will have an update at some point further down the all these different processes to say, hey, this is where we are with that one. So that's why we do the crossover.
For plans where we have an RFP out, but we don't have a plan back, would it be appropriate to put the RFP on the library and say, you know, just to let people know this exists and it's in progress?
There is a way you can link to the procurements page. We could do that. I think that would be better instead of linking it directly to it, because they can come and go.
All right, anything from the public on this? Okay. All right, thank you.
Mary,
Yes,
Mary, you know, we're looking at that Nantucket sustainability program and development. To me, that's really important. And I think about you sent us those pictures. You have been sent pictures around of the things that were on the walls in the Martha's Vineyard, in the ferry terminals.
Yes.
Yes.
Educating the public. Is that the kind of thing that Tim Lundgren Associates are looking at as well? What we do for branding, because that's very important for public education of what's going on and what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, once again, I'm sorry to say I'm a day early on everything. I have a meeting tomorrow to help see if that might be possible or not. So I can't answer that yet.
Okay.
But effectively, the sustainability program is kind of overarching for all of the sustainability developments that are ongoing at the moment. It's not just coast resilience, it's a lot of other things. It's
climate action, energy, all sorts of different aspects.
And I think it's also a way for the town to look at any project that the town undertakes and look at it in terms of sustainability, given the select board has done their strategic plan under this wider umbrella of sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gary Graham has joined us, that was Graham speaking.
Okay.
All right, anything more on the existing and developing plans? All right, so let's keep that slide up for a second, Vince. So we've talked about having potentially working groups within the committee to accomplish certain objectives, and public education was one that we have also talked about separately over the last couple of months, which we ought to be doing something there. I think that that's something that we will have to take some cues from the actions and branding that are being developed, and hopefully they will be out by February or soon. We'll find out when we find out. But let's talk more about the idea of trying to put something together that would be available to the public, that would be of assistance in coastal resilience scenarios like flooding. We've had a number of presentations. We've got all of these resources on our library, and they're available to us. And what can we do to provide something that's compact that you can give to a property owner or resident and say, here are some things you can do on your property that you don't need a permit for, and you don't need an agency to pay for. You can put a boardwalk down if your front yard is too wet to walk on, or a rain barrel, or whatever the tip is. And some might be a little bit bigger, and some might be a caution. If you do this, then that could happen. So does anybody want to start actually working on that to produce something, or does anyone have other ideas about what we can produce?
I think that for the overall education, it's going to be a multi-pronged approach. So I think the example you gave, Mary, is great for homeowners. Here's the information about what you can do. I think that's so great, and we've learned from other committees I'm on, if it's a negative issue, if you come with a positive brochure kind of thing of what you can do, it works really well. But I think that we're also going to need to do things there's a lot of people who don't have own homes or don't have the opportunity to do things to their home, and a lot of it's just information sharing. So I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I think a brochure about what does coastal resiliency mean in your community, something super basic.
Yes.
That's a little rock hard one thing, that it got to start somewhere, right? And so I think that I'm happy to be part of an education working group. I don't want to be the only member, but I think that we can come up with kind of a multi-pronged approach too, because obviously then it's going to be speaking about what we're doing, stuff like that. So
there's just one thing I just wanted to bring up very, very briefly, and I had to just double check a couple of things with Maureen Coleman, which is why I got Maureen Phillips' name wrong, by the way. Sorry about that. I had to just double check how it would work if there was to be a subcommittee or a working group. A lot of the times it doesn't really matter if you really formalize it as a subcommittee. That's fine. You may have to go through select board. I'm not 100% sure on that one yet, but no matter which way you go, as an informal or formal, say, working group or subcommittee, you still have to follow open meeting law. You'd have to come up with the number of people, and then from that establish quorum. I would suggest something maybe 3 people on a subcommittee. If you
2 is a quorum.
Exactly. Whereas if we went for 5,
No,
that's
too many.
Very large committee
Yeah.
then. So hence why I'm suggesting 3.
So I know I went to the town, because this is my first town committee, I went to the discussion with the lawyer, but let's say we decide as a subcommittee to work on a brochure. If I'm working on it at my own, do I have to let somebody know that you can come and you know what I mean?
You have to present it to a subcommittee meeting, and that meeting would be scheduled and advertised.
Yeah.
Got it.
So there'd have to be an agenda, there'd have to be minutes, and exactly, and that's obviously me straight away. I am once again that because it would be a subcommittee of this committee, I apparently would be the staff. Maureen was saying.
Well, then perhaps Vince, you tell us a little bit more about whether this is a good idea or not.
Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't, if instead of a subcommittee, maybe we just task out things to members and come back to the full meeting and
If
present.
we can, if one person wants to take on that. The problem is if members start meeting together about topics which would be deliberated at a meeting, then we're not following open meeting law. And
Right.
so, one person can do whatever one person wants to do, but it's hard to ask all of us as individuals to do a lot of different things as
Yeah.
individuals, and then to bring us all back in the meeting
Yeah.
space and have us all present on what we did.
Just trying to think what's the easiest way. What do you think, Vince?
Well, when I was chatting with Maureen about it, she said potentially just a simple subcommittee or working group of 3 follows open meeting law. Then you work on your education tasks together as a group, bring that back to the full committee, whatever you happen to have, and then this committee then either accepts it or puts any changes in place. I would still have to be present at all those as well. We have to have it posted, we have to have a meeting room. Just as it wouldn't have to be recorded, as I understand it, thankfully, because it would only be, a working group or subcommittee, and that makes it a little bit easier to then find a meeting space, which I would have to do. So I'm happy to go for it if this committee to go ahead with establishing an education working group and get the agendas in place and put it all together and find a meeting room. That's not exactly complicated. So is there an appetite for it is my real question. And plus I would actually advocate for this because I also have education as part of my remit, and I need to start putting progress on that. So that would be part of it.
Is this all relatively new rules? Because I always understood that you have a working group, if you have 5 in your committee and only 2 were meeting, that you weren't doing anything wrong. Is this all changed rules?
I was surprised when we had the
Yeah,
presentation.
I've never heard this
Yeah.
before.
Well, I just
For a
got
subcommittee.
Yeah, well, I've never heard that you had to keep minutes like that.
So when
And
we,
like an open
when we
meeting
did,
and all that,
Yeah, no, I've never heard, I've always heard if you had, so the select board has 3, I always heard if 2 of us meet,
Yeah.
there's nothing we have to do.
well, I just got this morning, and
From where?
Maureen Coleman, town admin. I can forward you the emails if you want.
Yeah,
I
would,
asked
it's
a lot
just,
of
it's
questions.
just different than what I understand. It might be new, I don't know.
Well, no, this is about the formation of a working group or subcommittee, not necessarily about just meeting in general.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is this semantics then? If, let's say 2 of us choose to meet
No.
and work on something and bring it back to the group, is that okay?
I don't know if I'm honest.
Well,
But
so
it-
we looked
That's
into
what we have
it
to
when,
find out.
because
It comes
we
down
looked
to
into
quorum,
it when Jen and
I
I,
think it
because
does.
Jen
so
and
if it's 3 people and the quorum is 3,
yeah,
if the 3 of you meet at the Handlebar Cafe and start talking,
Yeah,
then
that's
that's
no good.
illegal. But if you and I meet there,
Right.
it's nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
but this
exactly.
is about an actual little working group or committee, subcommittee that would be actually producing something at the point.
Right.
It's all about transparency.
right.
So yeah, I'm not sure how. I don't think it really affects it if you wanted 2 people wanted to meet and just get something done. I don't know how, but if you want a proper formalized or somewhat formalized working group where things are produced, yeah, I think this is the process we need to follow.
I just think whatever's easiest for you, Vince, because you're going to be picking up a lot of the extra work, and but we want to. But that's like an objective is to produce educational materials, and so I feel like we have to do it.
So if we were to have 3 people who would volunteer for it, could I ask that question?
I'd be
would-
happy to do like the education work in the classroom or with people. I think it's a little confusing with my other town role, but I'm happy to work on producing like a curriculum or whatever it is, brochures, whatever it is for outreach.
I'm thinking more brochures,
and-
trying to get simple bullet points
If I were to be on a subcommittee, my request would be meet after 3:30. I just can't take any more time during the normal work day.
Very good.
It's hard enough for me to actually be here.
I mean, I would volunteer if it wanted to be Graham and Sarah and me. I'd like to see that any working group had a diversity of backgrounds, so I don't want to put all the scientists on a group together unless they're dealing with a scientific research kind of a topic. So I don't know if I don't know, how do we create that?
Okay.
We have
So-
volunteers.
I also know that we're also missing one member, Jen. So maybe one of the simplest things I could do is put together an email afterwards and put out the call to volunteers, and
Yeah.
whoever responds first.
Yeah, you can just think about it too.
How does that sound?
And then do we need a formal, vote to create
Yes,
the,
we do.
yes, do we do that before or after the volunteers?
Hmm.
I'll do it before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would do it before, so that
Yeah.
Well, I'm for informality at this point, because it sounds like an awful lot of bureaucratic work.
It's not that much extra work on me.
Excuse me?
It's not that much extra work on me, really.
Okay.
It would be more or less an extra, what would we say, a 1 hour meeting, however often. So
Yeah.
it's not that much extra on me at any rate.
I think it's fine. And I think that, I mean, my opinion would be, or how I see it going is, like, the first few meetings is like, there's a lot more discussion and a lot more like active work. And then it's going to be like producing something, presenting it, editing it, and that kind of thing, where there's the workload gets less.
Yeah. Very good.
So.
I think that I like how Sarah mentioned the multi-pronged approach about education. I think that's important, because just handing somebody like FEMA stuff, if that's actually something that the Resiliency Nantucket workshops that are gonna come out of that, there's about 5 workshops that's gonna come out of that the consultant's gonna do. That's gonna include that FEMA information for people that are down on the water, those type of things. So again, about duplicated efforts, I wouldn't wanna see that. So I do like the fact that you're talking about what is coastal resiliency, because the average person doesn't really, understand what that is. What does it mean? What is it? What does this committee think of? Feel like that definition is. So I think that's good.
So do I have to make a motion
Yeah,
to,
you have a-
I make a motion to create a education subcommittee, education working group of the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee
3 members.
of 3 members.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Beg your pardon, has to be voice vote. You have to say your name and the vote.
Okay, so Mary Longeager in favor, aye.
Fritz McClure in favor, aye.
I made the motion. Is it
Yeah.
automatic?
Aye.
Gary Teller in favor, aye.
Matt V. Aye.
Peter Brace, aye.
Golding eye.
Graham Durovich, aye.
Unanimous.
Carries unanimously. Thank you, Vince.
Great. Thank you, Gary.
And so the next step is Vince will send out a sign up. All right, any other issues from the public that you wanted to bring to the meeting? Liz, Trias?
Liz Trios, I know.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna try and get this right. Would you come up to a mic?
Liz Trios, at the last meeting of the Civic League, I know we have an opening for a forum in February. And it might be something that you could start giving the public some information on what you're doing, how you're starting this, and how this is going along. Because it'll be a beginning for you to start getting out there with the public, because of the 24 different organizations that are part of the Nantucket Civic League.
So let me make sure I understand. So the Civic League wants to do a forum in February and is inviting us to consider, or no?
I'm letting you know
Yeah.
that there is a forum available in February. It was at our last discussion this past meeting, the beginning of the month. And if you're interested in doing something like that, I can talk to them about it and see about this going forward. If you feel you all have the time and you have something that you want to present there.
Okay. So, are you also inviting other people? Do you have a
No,
subject?
usually a
or-
forum is on a single subject.
Okay.
That's what we do. And it's usually televised, so it's getting out there to as much as the public all year round as possible. And that's something I think we should really consider.
Okay, so let me ask Vince, February,
Mm-hmm.
what are our hopes of having the strategies document or something else substantial that we would want to inform the public about?
At this point, I'd love to see it today. How about I try to hammer down a date? Either way, I still think there's value in this. I could at least do some kind of a presentation on coastal resilience. Some of the brief history of this committee, that kind of stuff. What actions have taken place, how we're, at that point, we'll be in the process of advertising an RFP, how we're looking for consultants, and I can put that together to start garner public support potentially.
That, I think, is really what you should be doing as soon as possible. You don't need to have everything in a formal situation before you get in front of the public. And let them see who you are and what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the benefit it's going to be to the island.
Okay, other comments on the idea of participating in the Civic League Forum in February?
And so would that be all of us going?
I think we'd all be invited.
Okay.
Would, Liz,
I'll get in
because
touch,
it's a Civic
I'll
League
get in
Forum.
touch with them immediately, and
But if all of us show up, then that makes it a public meeting as well. Can we concurrently run a public meeting of this committee with the Civic League Forum, or will we have to participate in
about
formally?
it that way.
I think
You just have to post it, that's all. Sorry, Sarah.
no, I was gonna say, I think like because the goal is educational and we're not making decisions at that, we're not deliberating anything, I think it would be fine, right?
Yeah, but
Well, just a second. So we had this with SPPF on their public presentation at the casino last summer. And Jeff posted it, even though we didn't participate, just to be on the safe side. So
I wanted to make sure the Civic League would not feel like they were being co-opted. That's sort of where I was going.
No, I will check with them on it, because we're always looking for some interesting things for the forum, and I think they're just about as interesting as you can get.
And Mary, you have, once you posted that and our quorum shows up, then you have to call the meeting to order.
Yes, yeah.
And then you have to adjourn it, so it has to be an actual meeting, even though we're not gonna deliberate.
Yeah, Sarah?
The other thing I was gonna say was we can make that like a goal of the education working group is to have something, at least one thing that's a handout by that meeting. So that would be a good thing. And I like that, like you were saying, Liz, like that shows that we're being, like the town is being proactive instead of reactive. I mean, like that we're, you know, like a lot of things Holly has said about Nantucket being on the forefront of starting this, like even though we are just starting and don't have everything to present, you know, it's more like here's what we're doing. And so I think that's a good point.
I think just my suggestion is a couple of the, I think people like pictures, and if we can show a picture of here's what happens downtown with X amount, and here's the water, you know, where the water is gonna go, here's X amount of high tide, those things that we've all looked at, I think we should show 3 or 4 of them and show them in motion, because people, that really brings it to light, is what we're facing, you know.
Actually took some on Sunday with the high tide, not that they would be public ready, but.
Likewise, I have become the storm reporter for the town intended a high tide event or a potential flooding event. I have to go check a lot of sites and report back on those. So I have lots of photographs.
well, it
I'm
might be a
thinking,
perfect spot for Marty Amp's University of Florida projections, which are really staggering.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking more of
Yeah.
that and or the stuff you can do online, showing if we have 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet, it changes, or the stormwater pathways, where you can change those. I think those are the ones that, and show people, here's where you go to see it. You know, if you're interested in this and you're interested in your own home, go online, here it is, this is the way you see it. I think that would be very helpful.
Maybe also on Sarah's note of just basic information. So all these things everybody's been talking about, we have on our website, the resilientact.gov, I can't remember what it is. It goes, ROAR, there you go. It goes right to what we've been doing. So we have a section on hazard mitigation, we have a section of just resiliency planning, linking right to what we did with PIN. So all of that's there, as well as what Matt just said, goes right to what the state's doing as well with Resilient MA, which is what we're trying to follow. So maybe just providing that information too, to say, hey, this information is at your fingertips. Just a thought.
What's the website, Holly? What's the address?
Resilientantucket.org. Yeah, Resilient Act.
Yeah. RESILIENTACK.org.
And that takes you just to the town's page
Yeah.
of all our resiliency efforts. There's a link to this committee. There's a link to
The library.
everything, the library, all the initiatives that we've been doing.
And just for informational purposes, we're talking about it, One Big Beach has a link and there's nothing there.
I know.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
and I thought when you saw it, I thought, oh, maybe it's been done finally.
Nope.
Because it's been 15 years and I looked, I go, all right, nothing there yet.
So it says something like under construction
Yes.
still. I've been talking to Florencia to try and find out what's happening with it, and she's trying to pull stuff together, as I understand it.
She's been working on the website
Oh yeah.
a lot.
Okay, well, thank you, Liz. How would we coordinate with this civically? Will you get back to us, or? what
I'm
do we
sending
need
him
to
an
do?
email right now. Because, you know, everybody's running around for the holidays.
Would you keep Vince up to date on any, specifics regarding that and whether we're in?
I will let you know as soon as I know.
Mary?
Yes, Gary.
Are you sure that just because members of this committee attend the Civic League meeting that we might be violating the open meeting law? I don't believe that.
I'm
Not
sure
unless
that
we're-
we're better off
not unless we're
posting it as a
deliberating.
meeting.
Even if you're not deliberating, you just posting it and then you're safe.
Yeah.
Rather be safe than sorry.
Okay, I'll look at the rules again.
Doesn't hurt to post it.
Just cover the base.
Any other public comment before I move on? No? Okay, thank you. Any other business from the committee?
I have one item, I'm gonna give it to Vince, but this came into the selectman's office, select board's office from Joe Farrell, has talked about, doing some stuff, syncing things and, et cetera, but I'll give you what he sent to us, I've read it, and I'm
Good.
trying not to collect stuff. But if you wanna have him come and talk to us, or you wanna look at it, it's fine.
Okay, just so that everyone's aware, Joe Farrell has been presenting a method for a while. I offered to meet him. I've made myself very available to meet with him. He was here for Stroll. I said I have 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before Stroll. He had my number and my email, never heard back. And I would be delighted to.
I know him personally,
Good.
so if I can get you guys together,
I've tried to meet him numerous times
Yeah.
since September, and it hasn't panned out.
So who is he and what is he doing or
So
proposing?
he has, just as an outline, because this is his project and I've only seen the outline of it. The very basic fact is he has beach modules and he wants to sink them in the intertidal zone, and then longshore drift would gather sand behind it. Is the idea, causing a beach to build up and build out. The potential for end scour and other things are something that he's looking into.
He's also studying, he's already got stuff there he's measuring on
Vince,
island,
it's important
so.
to say what a beach module is. It's a steel tank, like 60 by 40,
Yeah.
that you fill with water and sink in a place to act like an artificial reef.
So he, yeah,
I
exactly.
know some of, now that you say it,
They
I'm
look
kind
like
of
shipping
familiar with some of it, yeah.
They just look like giant shipping containers. And it's a method that I would love to see a little bit more research on first. He's talking about doing some testing as well. I'm still hoping to meet with him.
He owns
He's setting
property
up
in-
testing already, it looks like, yeah.
I've been trying to find out what kind of needs for testing and he didn't write about it.
I think he may have just put them in. But who knows? His business, he does salvages
It's the-
large, huge boats all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
Oil
So
rigs.
that's how he's learned
It's
it.
like the third largest in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
guess
he's
that
been,
was what my question was, like, who is this person? Like, what, like,
he's
what?
been proposing to do this
20 years.
for like 10, 15 years, and he did a study out in Nantucket, using some thing that was invented by some guys at Woods Hole that measured the amount of sand that flowed through the water and where it went. And that's some sort of light meter that he stuck out at different intervals, and then they monitored it over the winter.
Personally, I'd also quite like to see a sediment transport study in advance of this kind of thing going on, so that we could understand how sand moves for a start.
And then how it changes.
Exactly.
I could send you the articles I wrote on it when I was working at the Independent.
So Peter, is the point that he's trying to get us to pay him to do this?
No, he owns property in Smiths Point, and if you talk to, I think he's still a town employee, Tom Erickson, who lived on Rhode Island Ave. He moved his house twice back. And he says that prior to 2005, there was a sandbar about 500 feet off of Smith's Point that anytime there was a big storm, the sandbar broke up waves coming in and made sort of diluted whatever erosion would happen. And then in the winter of 2005, there was a storm that erased that sandbar. And I think Joe Farrell worked with Tom Erickson and got on his property to put this little shack to monitor, do that study. And Joe was then going to the Planning Commission and the Select Board and proposing these tanks. And there was interest, but it never went anywhere.
We just have to make sure that this follows due process and that all the correct permits and studies are done in advance to show that there wouldn't be any potential negative effects. And that's one of the things that I would like to see in place first, is the study on it.
And I think what he's doing is studying just one specific area, you know, so he's putting his things in and studying that area itself.
I asked him about that in an email, about replicates, how many replicates and over what time frame, and no answer. Anyway, we're getting into the very subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But anyway, you have the information and keep it.
Other business?
There was one other thing. A group of WPI students have undertaken an erosion study, mostly in the Nantucket area. Incidentally, that study also mentions, as they call it, the Joe Farrell project. I'm reviewing it at the moment and hopefully finish it later today, tomorrow, and send it to this committee. It's just send it out to everyone so they can read it. It is a wonderful report, but it was undertaken by undergraduate students, and it has a lot of recommendations. I asked them to also have a little look at some of the legal standing for some of the recommendations. I'm not sure they entirely follow that, so just add a grain of salt. Please be careful in reading it.
They gave a public presentation last week.
Yes.
One thing that was interesting at that presentation was something like 80-something% of the people in Nantucket were talking about the need for stricter setbacks around these areas, which, you know, sort of the opposite of what you would think homeowners would want, but they're the Nantucket clearly has had good PR and understands the issues better than other areas maybe. But I was surprised.
I was super surprised, and also that they had a really great response rate.
They did.
But I never saw their survey too, so I was curious how they asked the questions. Because not that I didn't believe it, but I was just curious if there was an understanding of what that meant.
Is their presentation going to be up on the town's website soon? Do we know?
Everything was recorded.
Through the Civic League, because I want to say the Civic League was all
Yeah.
They're sponsored.
Yeah.
through, so.
On the WPI project website, it's NCTV filmed it, you can watch it. There's a link there.
Right, so let's put that link in our minutes. Chris will get it to you,
And if you wouldn't mind, I have two things I wanted to let the committee know.
please talk.
So I just thought this would be something, you're gonna hear me as not only the preservation planner for the town, but as the local hazard mitigation plan coordinator, to bring in preservation into you all's conversation, because I think it's important to have that cross-reference. This past week, there was an article in Forbes about the future of preservation is sustainable tourism. I just thought that would be something that might resonate to anybody, that you know, the world of preservation is going that way. To embrace the ideals of sustainable tourism is an important and iconic cultural sites can be open and sustainable for future generations. If the world's treasures will be more enjoyable and lasting places to experience. So that's just something that to think about. And then maybe something to put in the reference library, but I'm such a I love this kind of stuff. So Sustainable Heritage, this is a new book that just came out. It's merging environmental conservation and historic preservation together. And this is written by two professors from the graduate program in historic preservation at Clemson and the College of Charleston. I'm very excited to read this. I just started poking in it and I haven't even really got to open it up. But two prominent people in the world of preservation that are notated on the back cover is Stephanie Meeks, who is the president of the National Trust, as well as Donovan Ripkema, who came to Nantucket this past summer through our Keeping History Above Water conference. and have indicated what a great contribution that this literature is providing in our heritage conservation and sustainable development. So this is just something to think about when we're talking about sustainability.
It's on Amazon, but it's not cheap.
No, it's not. That was a present for myself.
Thanks, Holly.
You're welcome.
Thanks, I've added a reference to this to the library.
Alright, so Vince mentioned the WPI project, that he's reviewing that, he may bring that back to us, so thinking about our next meeting on January 7th, that would be one potential topic. Any requests for other topics or other presenters that we want to invite for January 7th? Peter?
No.
Just a thoughtful look.
I'm wondering, and I don't know if this is, once again, too advanced, but if, one thing we talked a lot about last time was thinking about what we want to see in the plan, and I know that's something that the consultants are going to do, but I didn't know if there was something that we could do at our meeting that is less about hearing presentations and more about making it like a workshop meeting or a working meeting. We've talked in the past about starting to do like the little line areas, kind of identifying things like that. I don't know. I didn't have a plan coming here what it would be, but if we can, if there's any ideas for using the meeting as like a working meeting where we can be doing things together.
So just to raise the potential for that, hopefully at the very latest on January 21st, that meeting, that one might be about the RFP and workshop through some of the contents that I haven't. So yes, how's that
great.
work?
That sounds great.
Or maybe depending if I get lucky and everyone is happy with the contents, it might be January 7th, I don't know. But
okay. That sounds good.
So we have those two things coming up. We have the potential to invite some of the speakers we talked about last time, the health department, the building department, zoning, and so on, which we can look into. Is there anybody else has a topic that they want to present or they want to have addressed?
At the last meeting, you were asking us to bring to the meeting what are the respective groups that we each represent, bring those issues. So I have a Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board meeting at 5 today, and I asked them all to do that.
Okay.
So I expect to have that for the next meeting.
Great.
Okay.
So we'll slot you for the 7th to report from the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory.
I'll send them to Vince when I get them.
Anyone else?
One other thing I just thought of is, when Jen and I gave our presentation a few weeks ago or a month ago, we mentioned some of the things that we learned about at the Gulf of Maine 2050. And I was thinking, this might be actually for the education working group, but some of the towns and or islands, they're the same thing, that have come up with some really good materials for their community. I was thinking that I could either bring some of them in or kind of, at that point when we presented, I hadn't dived deep into those things yet, so I don't know if that's something that we can also, maybe I would be happy to kind of do something or just bring materials in, or if it fits. It's not a necessity, but.
very good.
Because there were some specific websites, and some of them were a lot of online education information or specific workshops they held for the community that were outside of making a plan. It was more different types of outreach. So.
I'm not sure that this is a topic, but on the select board, we have issues that come up. Sort of, we're talking about James Street again, I think Wednesday. And it's a yard sale piece of property that's access to the water and that could potentially be sold. It's planning to be sold to the neighbors, but I'm looking at it saying, I wonder if there's things that we should be thinking about from a resiliency standpoint or et cetera that haven't been factored in, because it's just not how that program is running. Mm-hmm. We're also, and I don't have the answer to that, but at some point, I think this group should be talking about those issues, and even if the recommendation is, hold off on everything, which I'm thinking about doing a motion at the select board, because I just think we're moving ahead, but not thinking about these types of issues. And the other one is we're, discussing Harbor Place and what will go there potentially, and, sort of trying to get a development agreement, and, whether that comes to town meeting in the next fall or this spring or next fall, the year after, what will that mean? And I know the developers will look at it. I just sent an email to Libby, because the developers will look at it from what they have to do. So if we build buildings, this is what has to happen, but we should be, as a town, be thinking about it. This would sort of be our chance. I've said things like, this is our last chance to really put the sewer pipes there to pump out every boat in the harbor, no questions asked. It's sort of our last chance. If we open up all those roads, et cetera, let's make sure that happens. And, and then this is the chance to fix access to the High Line, et cetera, but this might also be the chance to add some other resiliency there. I don't know what that is. It's not just raising buildings. It might be putting, sort of barricades so the stormwater can't come rushing into downtown. Maybe there's removable walls that go in for storms. I don't know. I don't have all that information, but.
So the question is that when does this committee or somebody with a function for coastal resilience get inserted into the process? Because,
there you go. Thank you.
So Concom, for instance, only when somebody wants to do a project and they go for a permit does Concom get involved. I don't know this for sure, so forgive me if I'm wrong, Ian, or correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Where do we get into the pre-planning, so that we can say this is an issue that needs to be addressed before you bring a project to us?
Yeah, and I don't know we should have that discussion, because I'm worried that this is going to go for 2 years, and that we're going to be making a bunch of decisions and have sold a bunch of land and done whatever, and then we'll come out and make recommendations in 2 years that say, geez, you really shouldn't be selling land next to the water.
And do we need, for instance, I'm just imagining this, a town meeting article sponsored by the select board to say that projects within X feet of the water line need to have a coastal resilience review before they can go forward, or for something similar, or below a certain elevation.
Holly's mouth is wide open.
I would think that would be something that you would want to have in the plan, because again, this plan is going to help guide everything that's coastal when it comes to land use. So
that's point, is that we're already.
It's going to be too late.
It's going to be late. It really concerns me to hear that they're yard sailing those kind of pieces, because
constantly those are the
one
most
of the
valuable.
things we talk about over and over again, though, is that the land bank is actually buying a lot of the properties because they're trying to keep that area open for being resilient and holding water and retaining water, and
public access too.
And public access, so it really concerns me
I'm
that the town
astounded
is doing that.
they're considering selling pieces that would deny public access.
Well, they'll put the access in. It's sort of not that simple, because some of these are, some of it the town sort of owned, or they sort of didn't, or they were paper roads that went away, or they were paper roads that the town was supposed to follow through and take, but they didn't. And so there's all this history behind it. So in some cases, we'd have a tough time getting them. So this is a way, sometimes it's a way to get it open, like sort of Steps Beach was something we all assumed we had, but the town had blown it 60 years ago or whatever, and we didn't, and so they had to negotiate, and we ended up with an extra lot up there, but that allowed us to still have access. So that's sort of, they're not always as simple as you think they'd be, but I'm worried that we're going to take 2 years and we aren't thinking about what those, are those areas corridors? Should that be where we have swales? I don't know.
But this speaks to exactly the function of this committee. This is an advisory committee that can put something like that together and then send it to the select board. One of the main functions is to provide information to the select board. So in that terms, maybe Mary could, and some others could put something together. You could work on it at the next meeting to put something together that the select board could then take into consideration.
Right.
Vince, I'm sorry, I can't believe that the select board created us, charged us with a coastal resiliency plan, hiring a consultant to develop this plan, and at the same time, they're trying to go forward with Harbor Place and build where we know the water is going to come. I can't believe that's part of the select board's reality. I can't.
Yeah, it's like I said, one of the best things this committee can do is
tell them no.
Yeah, come up with a certain set of guidelines or recommendations that the select board could take an action on.
The hard part, though, is it's not up to us what happens there.
Because it's their property.
It's their property,
right.
and they have vested rights in those properties and things. So the question is, how do you best navigate it,
Well, then it kind of goes back to your first point on James Street, what is currently municipal land. This select board can certainly have some say on what happens with municipal land.
So let's put this topic on our agenda for the 7th.
Yeah.
Let's define when we think the select board should ask for our advice or review on a project. Is it low-lying areas? Is it within so many feet of a coastline? Is it a specific set of property that we identify? Let's put that together and get that out, because I think they created this because they don't know when they need advice, and so they're waiting for us to give them the advice. So let's tell them when they should ask for have our advice.
And also, as our select board representative, if there's if you want the advice of the committee for certain projects, or for us to go to meetings, I know obviously as townspeople we can go to any meeting, but
we can't represent the committee.
We can't represent the committee, yeah. Or I guess if there's other things, oftentimes you send around things for us to read and be up to speed on. If there's things specific to the building plans that we should read before we meet in January. That's one specific project, obviously, but I don't know.
Ollie wants to say something, but
Yeah.
she doesn't know what to say. You're trying to think of how to choose your words.
Well, how about for a start, we put that on, as Mary said, and maybe we could come to you for input at that January 7th meeting.
Sure, that's fine.
And then you could voice concerns.
I guess I just want to, and maybe it's because I've had a little experience with the newly reenacted historical commission, and that they are an advisory, function as well. And they have already taken some advisory roles in saying, hey, town administration, hey, select board, this is something that you may want to consider. This issue is more like a kind of multiple approach, whereas I think that's a good thing to say, hey, these are items that we want to be an advocate for, but at the same time, maybe just providing some type of comment on this specific issue that they have at hand, but say that through the creation of this coastal resiliency plan, that's going to be something that's fleshed out. Because I know from discussions that we've had internally on resiliency in general, that's one thing that multiple department heads are wanting, some sort of guidance from not only from a government side, but also from a private sector side, and not have what happened downtown along Easy Street happen, where you have Easy Street bulkhead, town, citizen bulkhead. That's just one aspect that this coastal resiliency plan is going to help. How do we regulate this? Because this is a new territory. Another thing is, and I know Fritz as a planning board member, and I've been planning board staff for the past 4 years, they have strict requirements under the subdivision control law to review plans to subdivide a property. And people can subdivide a property if they meet the criteria. There's nothing in place that says just because you're on the harbor, you're right on the ocean, to say that you can't do that. So is that something that the town needs to take an initiative to create a bylaw to say we don't want this anymore, above and beyond what subdivision control law is? Those are the mechanisms that I would think that this plan is going to do to help facilitate better government processes for resiliency. That's just my take.
And in the meantime, like what you're saying, can we as a committee write, like, for lack of a better phrase, like an official opinion? If there's like for the yard sale example, if we as a committee discussed it and agreed, could we write something that was like, I don't know how official it is, but could you say it is under the opinion of the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee that you should hold off waterfront properties within so feet of the high tide line until the plan is in place or something? I don't know. I mean, that's just one example, but could we write something that's like these, they're not legally binding, of course, but it would be like an informative to the select board.
Yeah, the difficulty, and I'm agreeing, but the difficulties, I think sometimes these things have legs of their own.
Yeah.
There's expectations, and they've been brought by
Yeah.
homeowners, and the homeowners want to build a bigger house, and they, you know, and we've we've taken things out of ground cover. So now in these areas, things that used to be ground cover are no longer. And then if we sell them this land, then all of a sudden it's even a bigger thing. So there's less run, you know, there's less places for water to go. So we've gone one direction, and if that's not a good thing to be doing, then it's gonna take a concerted effort to change that. So.
This is why I'm a big proponent on green infrastructure.
Yeah. It's something that I keep bringing up as often as I can.
Yes.
Green and grey infrastructure.
Yes.
If we have to have something that is somewhat permanent, where can we add a green element or green tiering into it? Love that idea.
But it's interesting, and I agree with you, but when you look at the wetlands that used to be in play, when you look at the maps, you can tell, you know, sort of the wetland went all the way down Easton Street and it went right to Lily Pond, and you can look at the flood pathways and when you look at the town GIS and see, it's not like, they're sharp lines. The property line is where the green is where the wetland ended, you know, and that's a lawn now, and, you know, so it's a lawn with, you know, with someone with a full cellar. So they're doing, it's just changed completely. And I think as we go forward, just because it's legal right now, doesn't mean it's going to be a smart thing to do, because we're not going to be able to hold the water back in all those areas that I can see, you know. And so how do you know, so I don't know, what are the changes we have to make to be proactive so that we're going back and having sort of, you know, more ability to hold the water or direct it. And I don't know, I don't have the answer, but when you look at the map, it really is, it's really obvious what's happening.
The town needs to decide the most it can do, and then let the public know that, and that means that the developer will look at that new regulation or whatever and see that that's the limit of what we can do based on how much water is going to come, and is that going to be valuable, and will that help? Will that be enough for them? Will that make it worthwhile for them to develop that land, given what we can no longer do if we were drier and the water was lower?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And sorry to say, we'd all like to see action sooner, but this is one of the things that will come out of the policy side of the Coastal Resilience Plan, and this is one of the things that's hopefully going to give the long-term answer. Whether, you know, we need the short-term answer now is what people are saying. So what kind of bridging can we do to cover, say, the next 1.5 years before this, 2 years before this is finally in place?
Because the developers know what they can do now, and they push it as much as they can. But there are things in the regulation that stop them. They can't go beyond that, because this what I'm talking about has to be one of those things eventually.
Can I ask Ian for clarification? I think in the last meeting you said that Concom adapts to changing conditions by requiring information that is no more than 6 months old when an applicant comes before the commission. But it seems to me that doesn't look forward at all, and then perhaps the Concom has no jurisdiction over what might become wetland or what might happen to an area in the future. Is that?
Well, that's probably a question for Jeff, because the answer is I don't know. We're reactive rather than proactive. I mean, we have in these areas, I remember as a kid when, you know, beyond Al Silva's, it was basically all wetlands. I mean, it's staggering what's been filled in my lifetime. But, you know, we insist on breakaway panels that, you know, there's nothing that can contaminate the flood water, that it's all stored above, you know, the height of the predicted height of the flood water. In practice, the 6-month rule is really always honored in the breach. So, in fact, I'm not even sure that is a regulation.
And I think that what we're talking about now is among our most important roles, which is to start having people think about the future. And when people go to the planning boards or HCC or wherever they go, it would be great if they would always be asked the question, how have your plans taken into consideration some of these rising water levels in your area or expected? And we may not have the legal basis to say, no, because of the limitation that the requirements usually are years behind development. But at least those questions start getting asked at the appropriate time. We'll start getting people sensitive to it, but it's a very important role that I think we have.
I think that's a great question, Gary, and to me, it's part of the public education component of the charge is to make people aware that the land that they're looking at today won't look like that in the future, possibly. And they can voluntarily choose to adapt their plans for today to accommodate what might happen in the future, and that might be helpful for them. You know, in the absence of regulation, there is education and voluntary.
Well, I mean, if we were taking that approach as a society, then we'd have an entirely different approach to climate change and sea level rise, unfortunately. And as a practical matter, then you get the issue of what constitutes taking when you have some of these regulations.
But I'm thinking a little bit less aggressively. So for instance, I just put new gutters on my house and found out afterward that it would have been appropriate to have a larger capacity in the gutters so that they don't overflow and dump the water right next to my house anyway. And if I had that information in advance, I could have spent more on larger gutters and mitigated the water problem that I was having, but I just didn't know. And so I'm thinking that there are some people who will take information like that and say, well, I don't want to have to pay for this problem in the future, let me address it now. And so these are little things, not trying to constitute a taking to say you can't build there, but to try and say build smarter there, because we can provide you with information that you might not have been aware of what might happen on your property given the climate we're in.
And that always comes up with Concom, that we
Yeah.
insist that water is allowed to disperse rather than add into the problem.
I just think it's important that everybody realizes that the plan that's going to be created has a lot of value in change in ways that you all see would be the proper avenue. So maybe all these different ideas that everybody thinks about, jot them down so that way when the consultant does work with you all, they can incorporate that, because that seems to be the way to do it. Is just get it out there.
So I'd like to suggest, piggybacking on what Holly just said, we come back on January 7th and start making a list of places where we feel that coastal resilience review is warranted, like Harbor Place. Whatever we may be aware of in our personal lives or our business lives or in our town positions. Let's just start listing them out and then go to whatever agency is responsible and say, hey, we'd like to be involved. Let's start with the list. Anything else for today?
Okay, I want to add that on the taking subject, there was a New Jersey case that went to the New Jersey Supreme Court where a family that claimed that they weren't able to build on a property by local regulation was their protest was denied on the grounds that they could still put deck chairs on their property and enjoy the view. So you never know what's going to happen.
All right, thank you. So a motion to adjourn to New Jersey?
So moved. So moved. Do I have to?
So moved.
Yeah.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourn?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
FinCom.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
You're gonna have enough